The title of this thesis is The Dialogue Between Man and Nature in Romanticism and Nowadays, an Historical and Cultural Comparison. What is elaborated in this study is exactly the relationship between man and nature, also in a diachronic perspective, and the analysis of this comparison goes back to the origins, that is from ancient times, when man and nature were strictly connected. The introduction gives a general view of this relation through the metaphor of the myth of Prometheus, which better describes how this relationship degenerates and gets ruined because of man's selfishness and above all because of man's evolution in the path of knowledge and progress. In the first chapter, we have a brief excursus starting from prehistory, when man was closely connected and dependent on nature, to present day, when the human being turns away and indeed becomes its main enemy, thus giving life to a real struggle of titans. In the second chapter, precisely in the paragraph about nature in the romantic sensibility, we highlight the very central role that Mother Nature and all its elements play in the artistic creation of this historical and cultural period, which is fundamental to the Western identity. Many authors will be cited and their positions and thoughts analyzed with respect to the inspirational force of nature. In the next paragraph, the role of the fusion of artist and nature is central. In particular, we observe how the romantic artist, with his extraordinary sensitivity, is able to capture the most secret aspects of the natural world and return them to the rest of humanity through his art. Two important protagonists of romantic painting will be mentioned, namely John Constable, who has a more real perception of nature and therefore a clear objective and a direct vision aimed at representing nature as it is, and William Turner, who, on the contrary, describes in a masterly way the feeling of harmony between man and nature, but also the grandeur and the destructive power of nature. A specific section is reserved to this latter artist, and some of his most significant paintings will be analyzed as the maximum expression of romantic sentiment. The paragraph dedicated to the conflictual relationship between man and nature during the Romantic period underlines the beginning of a dispute between the two great forces. The fundamental elements of this conflict are highlighted through the works of two important scholars. First, we examine the evolution of the complex thought of Giacomo Leopardi about nature and its transformation from a benevolent and comforting divinity mother into an indifferent stepmother in front of her son's cry of pain. This can be found in some of his texts that have marked some fundamental turning points. Then we go on to analyze the rebellion of nature against man through the metaphor of the rhyme of the ancient mariner, in which Coleridge, through the story of an old sailor, describes a painful story of sin and redemption. The old man meets three young people heading for a wedding party, and also one of them, who, enchanted by the sailor's eyes, is forced to hear his story. The mariner tells him of his experience at sea and of how he killed an albatross, a creature of God and therefore of nature, and what he had to face because of the latter's avenging fury. In a succession of allegoric scenes and of settings at the limits of supernatural, through a cathartic awareness of the wickedness of his action, the protagonist repents of his work and his life is saved, but for the rest of his days an inextinguishable anguish will seize and force him to wander from heart to heart, to tell his crime and teach, with his example, love and reverence for all things created and loved by God. Finally, the masterpiece of Mary Shelley is analyzed. Frankenstein represents the process man has faced over the centuries, namely the path to self-destruction due to his selfishness and above all due to neglect of nature. Here, in fact, Dr. Victor Frankenstein wants to overcome the limits imposed by common sense, going beyond the unknown, and he does so without respecting natural laws. In fact, he compares himself to God and manages to give life to a creature, or rather a monster, that will eventually rebel against the scientist. This story could be compared to that of Icarus, who failed because he aimed at a too ambitious goal, at the limits of arrogance. It follows that man who tries to replace the generative power of nature ends up to create abominations. As Prometheus did by stealing fire from the gods, Frankenstein steals another divine prerogative with equally harmful consequences. The third and final chapter is devoted to the theme of the relationship between man and nature in present days and explains the historical and cultural matrix of the causes of the imprint left by man on the environment and the effects of this disastrous action. In fact, in the first section, the cause of the ongoing conflict is mainly examined, namely the progress and the technological advancement of the human race, which led to an unprejudiced and destructive change of approach to the natural environment. In the second paragraph, we will address the last and problematic point linked to this incessant struggle between man and nature, the drama of the climate change. Some data concerning pollution and environmental disasters will be analyzed, and above all, some of the measures proposed for the coming decades will be shown to prevent man from destroying the planet and consequently himself. Therefore, from the close complementary and dependent relationship with nature, man finds himself confronted with it in an incessant struggle whose outcome risks not seeing winners.